Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we dissect an uber-woke review of The Little Mermaid from just the source you expected it to come from. We also dress down a major news outlet for its embarrassing bias against the comedy legend. And we speak to an Emmy-winning journalist who refused to accept the narrative surrounding George Floyd's death and the so-called summer of love that followed. You know, I think what the world needs now is more kink from Disney films. Yes, that's actually part of the argument posed by a New York Times critic in his review of The Little Mermaid. Really, here's a tiny snippet. Joy, fun, mystery, risk, flavor, kink, they're missing. The dude actually wrote that, and it went right past the editors' heads, or maybe they just nodded along. Just amazing. But, you know, that's not the only thing that jumped out at me about that particular review. I read the whole thing, and yeah, the kink line did get my attention for sure. Now, the article, I think, when you look at it from top to bottom, belongs in the Museum of Woke, and that's where people in the future will gather to examine just how far that woke culture infiltrated every part of our lives. I think the article's going to have its own wing at this point. Now, here's another part of the review commenting on the casting of actress Halle Bailey, who is black, as Ariel. The colorization hasn't led to a racialized, radicalized adventure. It's not a black adaptation, an interpretation that imbues white material with black culture until it's something completely new. It's not The Wiz. It's still a Disney movie, one whose heroine now, Psy, happens to be black. Sorry, no progress here, folks. Ariel isn't staging a BLM protest mid-movie. Therefore, it's a wasted opportunity, according to the New York Times. But there's more. Here's what else he had to say about a segment of the movie that was surprisingly good, a very small scene in question. This is a witty, complex, exuberant, breathless, deeply American number that's also the movie's one moment of unbridled, unabashed delight. And I can't wait to see how Disney's going to apologize for it in 34 years. You get it? You're never woke enough. He even admits it. It's funny, the movie ditched some of the problematic song lyrics from the 1989 original film. It also made Ariel's sisters a hodgepodge of nationalities. Javier Bardem is here as her father. He doesn't exactly align with her particular nationality. And, of course, they race-swapped the main character. And, wait for it, not woke enough, apparently. Disney bends over backwards to appease the woke mob, and a woke writer envisions a future in which Disney has to apologize again, but this time for this version, not the 1989 version. You know, a wise man once wrote, Hollywood went woke and lost its soul, and the same is often true for film critics. Too many view films through a hardcore progressive lens, and their reviews reflect that mindset. Now, I'm a conservative critic, and I'll note a film's political and cultural messaging. I might throw a sharp elbow or two now and again. No apologies here. I'm very clear who I am and and how I approach films. But what I won't do is let that impact the bottom line. Is it a good film or a clunker? That's the prime directive for a film critic first and foremost, no matter where you lean. And I'm happy to praise good liberal films. I do it all the time. I'm not going to also spend just paragraph after paragraph pounding a movie, especially a kid's film, to the minutest details because it doesn't align perfectly with my worldview. It's just exhausting. But apparently some feel differently and some work for the New York Times. Now that review is a perfect example of exactly what I'm talking about. It's also perfectly hilarious, but I don't think it was intentional.
You're listening to my dad's podcast. He cried like a baby watching Snoopy come home.
Variety magazine is woke to the core, and they're not too keen on free speech either. Sound crazy? Sound like I'm going off the rails? Well, I read the site a lot. It's kind of what I do. And the evidence keeps telling me just that. And here's another example of what I mean. Now, John Cleese recently corrected the record about a live production tied to his 1979 film classic, Live for Brian. The Monty Python movie features a scene where the male character, played by Eric Idle, the great Eric Idle, says he's a woman and he wants to bear a child. In the film, he's mocked as foolish. Now that sentiment, that scene, could be seen as transphobic in some circles. Now, the media incorrectly reported that Cleese was agreeing to have that particular sequence taken out of this new adaptation. Cleese himself on Twitter said, nope, not true at all. Here's the facts. So how did Variety report the story? Well, here's the lead. Monty Python star John Cleese has expressed disdain for modern sensibilities and PC culture on several occasions in recent years. Okay, stop. Disdain for modern sensibilities? It's a very vague statement. It's almost like he's saying, I don't want them women to vote. So it's vague on purpose and a little bit cruel. Plus, the term PC culture, yeah, they put it in scare quotes because it doesn't really exist. Well, you know what? It does. And all the media scare quotes in the world is not going to change that fact. It's true. Now, here's more of this story from Variety. It's a short story, but boy, it's very efficient in packing in extreme bias. The comedian found a new battleground for those convictions by claiming that his plans to mount a stage adaptation of the 1979 comedy Life of Brian have been misreported by the Daily Mail in a now amended article, particularly in regards to the potential decision to revive a controversial scene involving a transgender character. Okay, so the Daily Mail made up the story, got it wrong. And yet Variety blames John Cleese for finding a new battleground. I think it found him. Finally, the site put the word misreported in, yeah, you get it, scare quotes again, as if it didn't happen. The article said that the original piece was amended, meaning Cleese was right and it was fake news. Whew. Again, what I love about the story is it's not very long, but it's so condensed with bias and the narratives they want to push and anger towards the source in general. It's just amazing. When the media hates someone, and they absolutely hate John Cleese because he skewers the woke mind virus and he speaks up for free speech, they let you know it, even if they have to make up facts along the way. And I don't think there's an argument in the world about that. Is there?
I came here for a good argument.
No, you didn't. You came here for an argument.
Well, an argument's not the same as contradiction.
Can be.
No, it can't. An argument's a connected series of statements to establish a definite proposition.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. It isn't just contradiction.
Look, if I argue with you, I must take up a contrary position.
But it isn't just saying, no, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Journalist Liz Collin went from being a respected part of Minneapolis TV's landscape to having her likeness beaten over and again in her own driveway. Now, how did that happen? Well, blame the reaction to George Floyd's death 3 years ago, following, of course, that fateful interaction with the city's police. We know all about this story and about how the riots, both peaceful and a bit fiery, engulfed the country for quite some time afterward. Though Collins' story might have got lost in the shuffle had she not taken complete control of it. Now, she worked for about 14 years as an Emmy-winning reporter for WCCO-TV in Minneapolis. It's a big time. But the trouble began for her in large part because she was married to the police union president at the time, and now, Bob Kroll. And that was, of course, at the time of Floyd's death, and everyone was raging against the police. She became a target for police critics just by her marriage connection, even though she didn't cover the protests or police issues before or after Floyd's death. But that didn't matter. Months later, more than 100 Black Lives Matter protesters gathered peacefully outside this couple's home. They smashed effigies of both Collin and her husband. They screamed profanity that their kids could hear from within the home. And an even more outrageous detail of the story, one of the protesters was a local Democrat. His name is John Thompson. Turns out, by the way, that John Thompson got crushed in the subsequent election, so I'm glad to hear that happen, but still, just vile. Now, Collin could have backed down. Many people would have backed down. I might have backed down. That's pretty scary stuff. But she didn't. She left WCCO-TV and she joined Alpha News. It's a newer media outlet. It's alternative. It's right-leaning, perhaps you could say. But it really just covers the news stories that the mainstream news media won't touch. And that's just almost making you conservative by default. But again, her story doesn't end there. She also wrote a book about what she went through and specifically about what happened with George Floyd, his death, the media coverage, and how different parties really weaponized it to make their ends meet. The book's called They're Lying, the Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. But now Collin is making a documentary based on that book and those subjects. And she's joined the show because she wants to share more about her journey. I want to share more about her journey for sure, and also why a documentary version of this book is so important to the overall story. Here's my conversation with the brave, smart, and talented Liz Collin. Liz, it's great to have you on the show. Now, obviously, you're an award-winning journalist. You've done investigative work. Not technically a filmmaker, but obviously you're getting into filmmaking now with They're Lying, the documentary. Talk about that transition, why you did it, and what it's been like so far.
I'm just getting started in this world, Christian. I appreciate you having me very much to spread the word a bit. But this is based on a book that I wrote, They're Lying, the Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. But since putting out that book, I have heard from people around the world. It's been an overwhelming experience just to hear from everyone who's been touched by this incident and the lies that have been told that began here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I was a reporter for mainstream media and an anchor for 15 years at the CBS station. But I just wanted to go ahead and put this on film now, from hearing from these people who are now willing to tell their stories for the very first time. And there is something obviously about that visual aspect. People also have a hard time finding the time to read books nowadays. But this is my way of sort of setting the record straight. I want people to look back at history and actually know the truth about what went on, and hearing it from the people that were actually involved. So that's what I'm doing this summer. The plan is to shoot this summer and hopefully release in the fall.
Great. Now, when you think about documentaries that make a difference, you could say Inconvenient Truth. With you, no matter where you stand on climate change, that film rocked the conversation, rocked the culture. We were talking about it for years and years. I think we still use it as a touchstone. Are there other documentaries that you could point to and say, gosh, if we can do it like that, with that spirit, that tone, that sense of bravery and truth, anything come to mind?
I think that just more recent documentaries with 2,000 Mules, I thought was very well done and interesting. It's sort of like this line drawn in the sand that certain things won't get attention, and that's what I found with this topic. This really ignited the fire for racial injustice and such. But there was so much more to this story, and I do believe that if the truth was told about this from the beginning, we didn't have to have buildings that burned down. We didn't have to switch the narrative to these racial undertones that I think.
I've spoken to artists in the past, and when they make movies or projects or any kind of artistic endeavor that bucks the system, they get some repercussions. Sometimes they hire a crew member and he or she quits. They get other pressure. Have you faced anything like that along the way in the early stages of this documentary, or have things gone more smoothly?
I am grateful to say that I have faced nothing. I will say that I'm a reporter, so I came at this as a reporter, as a journalist, and I think that's why the book has done so well. Also, it's really a book of fact. It's not anything I imagined and decided to go ahead and put out a fairy tale. So no, I mean, I've been on tour with the book for about 6 months now, just stopping around places in Minnesota. I've been to other states now as well, too, talking about that. I would say the only real pushback, there was a 21-year-old cook threatening to quit at a venue that I was planning to visit to talk about the book and talk to the owner of the business. And I said, well, did he actually read the book? I don't know why he feels so strongly about quitting his job. And the owner, promptly said, no, of course he hasn't read the book. So we just went to a different venue in town that was happy to host me instead. So it worked out just fine. But sadly, we live in a generation now that there is a lot of closed-mindedness. People aren't willing to have conversations. And I come at this as a reporter, as a journalist, as I said, and I believe that we have to have these conversations. We have to bring common sense back. We have to be critical thinkers
Sure.
because, even this incident, it goes back to a Facebook video that went viral, not body camera footage that clearly shows what led up to the incident. There's a lot more of this backstory, and it should scare people that the body camera footage was hidden. It was hidden for a reason, and many other things were hidden as well when it comes to actual evidence in this case. And that's what I'm bringing out as a reporter in all of this.
Now, obviously, with a book and a movie, there are two different media formats we're working with, but time has passed since you wrote the book. You're going to be going into production soon on the film. What are you able to include in the film that will be, if not radically different or important or something, gosh, you wish you could have put in the book, but just time or whatever reasons you weren't able to?
Yeah, I think that in the beginning, I had sort of heard from people in one circle, but this is kind of brand new faces and stories, but including officers who were trapped in the 3rd precinct the night it was a planned surrender to the protesters in Minneapolis, and just talking with them about what they've gone through is pretty remarkable. Basically, being served up as scapegoats by their administration, by the mayor of Minneapolis, etc. This is a planned surrender that if they give the precinct up to these protesters, this rioting will stop in Minneapolis. And that really, served as a, symbol in all of this that spread across the country. I mean, the match was lit here in Minneapolis that spread across the country. So talking to them, I think will be really quite something that'll come out in the film. And also the family members, the officers who are in prison now. You have 2 of them that will be serving sentences until 2025. Thomas Lane, who was on the job for 3 days. Alex King, who was on the job as a Minneapolis police officer for 3 days. They're in prison now after pleading guilty after seeing what happened in Derek Chauvin's case. So their family is talking. Families are talking for the first time, and also the officers themselves who are in prison. A couple of them speaking for the first time and hearing in their own words what went on.
I think that your film, like your book, could change some hearts and minds if people would open themselves up to check it out, to read it, to watch the film when it's out. But a lot of people won't. They're going to turn their heads away. They're going to prejudge it. They've got their narratives. They got their stories, and they ain't budging. Now, I think it's one of the biggest problems we have in the culture right now, that people are unwilling to hear both sides. You mentioned that cook who didn't read the book but wanted to object in any case. How do we change that? And do you think about that as you're going into production with the film, where you want the film to somehow open those minds, open their hearts, give people a chance? How do you incorporate that philosophy into the storytelling?
Yeah, of course. I do think about that. And I think that, again, Christian, just going back to what we were told, that this is racism. You have the mayor of Minneapolis apologizing to Black America the next morning after this happens. And we're going into that narrative because I think there is so much more to that. You have Alex King, who is a Black police officer, who was with George Floyd twice as long as Derek Chauvin ever was. And just hearing his family story is quite remarkable. Here's this Minneapolis family, his mom being a school teacher in Minneapolis, living in North Minneapolis for Alex's entire life. She's adopted kids from all across the globe, and doesn't have a racist bone in her body, but to be portrayed as this family responsible for the most racist police interaction, police incident in history has really been quite something to this family, taking out second mortgages on their homes in order to raise the bail money to get their son out of prison. And just, hearing about what all they've been through and painted as these monsters that they clearly are not, and pushing back on that. But we have many officers who are Black who are in the film, and that's not really by design. They're coming forward saying, this is BS, and we've had to pay the ultimate price, losing hundreds of officers from the Minneapolis Police Department, being painted as these racists that we're not.
I think we're maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but what are your thoughts as far as the distribution of the movie? I imagine main outlets may not like it. I don't think a streaming platform is going to go near it. Are you thinking that far ahead, and where do you think this may be shown or seen? What's the future for this?
Yeah, I think that we've actually had some interest in some streaming services.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So there is hope.
Okay.
Yes, and and that's also what I thought with the book. I thought, Amazon, are they even going to let me put it out there? And the book was an Amazon bestseller for several months. So censorship clearly is a real thing. There's been a few things here and there that I've had to fight back on. But again, I think when it is facts that you're putting out there, the facts are on the side of truth here. Hey, that's what facts are, even though they can make people feel uncomfortable. Because again, we're sort of led to believe a lot of things about what's going on in the world, and then minds and hearts are changed down the road. And I have heard from a lot of people who've given the book a chance, who maybe were struck by the title and such, and they went ahead and read it anyway, and they've emailed or reached out to me on social media and said that their minds have been changed, and in fact they wish that people would have told the truth, and things perhaps would look differently. Yeah. But I think that our goal is to offer this for free. That's why we're doing a crowdfunded documentary. And we've had a lot of success and luck with donations so far, and some donors coming forward saying they want to see this. So we might be distributing through Alpha News as well, which is an independent media group, conservative media in Minnesota.
Excellent. For me, I'm a recovering art major who ended up in journalism, but to watch journalism collapse in the last few years, yes, it's always been left-leaning. That's, that was the status for a while. But just to see what's happening today, the corruption is, it kind of takes my breath away, honestly. You worked in the belly of the beast. You were there for a long time. Did you hear whispers from your colleagues? Did people talk behind the scenes saying, gosh, what's going on in our industry? Or did people stay quiet? I know you did something about it. You struck out on your own, and we'll talk about Alpha News in a minute. But was anyone bemoaning the fate of journalism, off hours? Because I can't imagine there aren't some good people in there who aren't aghast at what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. And, just backing up a bit for my background, I spent 20 years in mainstream media, and I feel like it was about 5-6 years ago. I was just so troubled with poisoning the population. It's not so much what the news was telling you, it's what they were not. And there was so much information, and when you're in a market for a long time, the whole point is to, build up your sources and, be someone that the public can trust. And that was something I really took seriously. And I wasn't a political person. So I wasn't doing anything from, political gains, but with COVID, there was so much more to that story that we were just not willing to share. You definitely saw this push for, you really need to focus on painting police as the bad guys, which I never really felt comfortable with. I always felt with a lot of these stories, there was so much more. And it was sort of like, you'd see reporters pick and choose what they decided to do and how they would blend a story and put it together. But, more importantly, what they would leave out of stories. And so I was always bothered by that. I'll be honest, there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes with a palpable hatred of then presidential candidate Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, and I think that's because obviously he was pointing the finger at the media and telling a lot of things. He's obviously, with his frank style that he has, pointing out things that they weren't happy to have out there. But yeah, certainly there were many of us that would whisper behind the scenes. I talk about in the book that even after George Floyd, a week after, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of care or concern to understand the case in context. Instead, WCCO, where I worked, implemented a policy that half of the people we interviewed had to be non-white or from a protected class. That was the mandate. So I just felt very uncomfortable with as a reporter, I now have to care about your skin color, or I have to worry about who you're sleeping with. I just thought that, this is just very bizarre. And I'd never really been, faced with anything like that. But that happened sort of again and again. And I think you look at it, all of this, everything can be understood if you follow the money and follow the power. And, the money comes from big pharma when it comes to a lot of the ad revenue at these television services. So you understand then, where the money's coming from and why you're not going to do a story about someone who is vaccine injured after receiving the COVID jab, or these other alternatives to treating COVID that are much cheaper, et cetera. That part of the conversation is just going to be cut out. because of where the money is
I've-
coming from. So
I've covered how comedians used to poke fun at Big Pharma quite a bit, but that seems to have dried up in recent years. Gee, I wonder why. You mentioned one of the biggest things about journalism and bias is what's not covered, the stories that are ignored, the narratives that aren't explored. And of course, you're with Alpha News, which is in Minnesota, covering the stories the mainstream media won't, which is a great angle. It's a great tagline, and of course, we need it. But is that the future of news for the moment, that other platforms pop up and pick up the pieces in a sense, or do the work other people aren't? Is that where we need to be right now? And can you sometimes, does your work sometimes shame traditional journalists to cover a story that they've been ignoring for a while?
Yeah, we really do that. And I'll be honest, I was like, I don't know I don't feel comfortable about what I'm doing here. And it's sort of like, you turn on the news and it's everybody has the same story. Everybody tells it the same way, and it's 20 seconds here, there, and then, hey, here's weather. But I just know that there's so much more going on. So I did, jump ship and sort of took this leap of faith, and it's been really incredible. I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of people seeing our content every day with Alpha News, and that's why I think the future of news is just online. I mean, it's the way people live now. They're not gathered around the television at 6 o'clock. They're, out there going to sports and, living their lives, and then they can go ahead and consume news however they want, whether it's just on the weekends or, early mornings, Facebook, Twitter, etc.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to compete with these platforms that are pretty old. But we found that at Alpha News, just in the last year, we've by far broken more stories than the mainstream media is, because we're just not really afraid. I think there is a fear in media that, this is too controversial to touch, or, I have to be careful about this or that. And we don't really have those conversations at Alpha, which is what I enjoy. Mm-hmm. And then we see the mainstream media go ahead and follow.
What you've gone through, the name calling, the incidents, the attacks, I just, in researching you before our conversation, it turned my stomach, honestly, because it seemed just patently unfair. But that's what happens when you buck the system. If you were talking to someone else who had something important to share that was truthful, but you knew that he or she was going to face something similar, what do you say to them? How do you prepare them for what happens next?
Yeah, I would say that it's worth it. I mean, I was, again, a little hesitant, but I'm so glad I did. I just felt like I can't even sleep at night, the fact that this has been allowed to happen, and, sort of knowing the truth and knowing the people involved. You got to do it. I mean, because I'm not sure what our world looks like. People would ask me, aren't you afraid by putting this out there? And I'm really afraid if we don't. That's where I come at this. So I would encourage anyone who is looking to take that jump to do it, because I have had really overwhelmingly nothing but support. So I want to go ahead and write my own story as a journalist. I'm not going to let somebody else write it for me.
I love that. Liz, thank you so much for being what a good journalist is and following the truth and not the narrative. Of course, the upcoming film is They're Lying, and it's a documentary that shreds the media lies about George Floyd, BLM, and so much more. Please go to they'relyingthemovie.com. That's where you can donate to the crowdfunding campaign. Again, without your help, the story can't get out there, and we need to see it as soon as possible. And of course, you can pick up They're Lying, The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. That's available right now as a bestseller on Amazon.com. Liz, thank you so much, and stay safe.
Christian, thank you so much. Take care.
All right, before we go, it's time for your weekly tip. Now, The Glass Castle was a movie that came out in 2017. I saw it at the time, enjoyed it. Didn't get much love. It made about $22 million, which is not horrible by today's standards for a drama, but back then it really wasn't a strong finish. And critics were not in love with the film. A lot of them complained that the fact-based story was maybe a little bit too uplifting at the end, and I get that. It's a tale about a father who was charismatic and thoughtful and passionate and fun, and also a heavy drinker and wildly delusional. He's played by Woody Harrelson. It's I think one of his best performances. He's a very good actor, and he's terrific in this movie. And it's all about, he has a family. His wife is Naomi Watts, and she's codependent and kind of in her own world as well at times. But it's all about how the father ruled over his clan. The kids loved him, but he just disappointed them again and again and again. It's a really intriguing story, very powerfully told. But again, I think it just didn't hit the mark at the time. People just missed it. Wasn't what they were looking for. Who knows what? There's many reasons why a movie just doesn't connect with audiences. But the good news is it was just added to Netflix's streaming platform, and I highly recommend it. I think that Glass Castle is one of those unsung movies that people miss the first time, and through the glory of streaming, you can check it out all over again right now. Again, thank you to Radio America for having me on their platform. I really appreciate it. And of course, I love it if you go to HollywoodInToto.com for all the latest Hollywood news from a right-leaning, freedom-friendly perspective. I know the editor-in-chief a little bit, and he's good people. See you next time.